Hello, everyone. My name is Rhodora Vennarucci, and I will be presenting the paper In Ersilia's Footsteps on behalf of myself and my co-authors, Davide Tanasi, David Fredrick, Nicholas Reynolds, Kaitlyn Kingsland, Brianna Jenkins, and Stephan Hassam. We would like to thank the Web3D conference organizers for giving us this opportunity to share our project with you today, and we'd also like to thank the panel discussants for engaging with our work. So, in the last 3 decades, 3D technologies have really moved to the front for recording, visualizing, and interpreting archaeological data. As part of their digital toolkits, teams routinely use photogrammetry to document the excavation process. And as just an example of the type of 3D data that archaeological projects often produce, I include here on this slide an image of a 3D model of the mosaic floor in the triclinium at the Villa del Casale, and on the right, a digital model of the elevation of that same floor. And these were both produced by the IDEX team. And you'll hear more about that project in a few slides. So inevitably, these models must strike a balance between accuracy on the one hand and playability on the other. A model whose geometry attempts to reproduce every detail of the real-world targets will be too large to use for real-time interpretation. Many archaeological teams decimate their models, simplifying surface geometry and achieving visual fidelity by baking out normal maps that reproduce the appearance of the target with a fraction of the polygons. And the models that you see on this screen had to undergo that process in order to be hosted on Sketchfab, which has a restriction on the size that these models can be. So for many teams, the visualization platform of choice is a game engine, either Unity 3D or Unreal, and game engines are often joined by 3D GIS. When it comes time to share the site models with the broader community of scholars, and especially the public, 3D GIS and standalone builds from a game engine encounter substantial friction. For one, few users in a non-professional audience have GIS software, while accessing a game engine requires the audience to first download and then open the application. And since the end user's hardware is often less robust than that of the archaeological team producing these models, this can create choppy play and crashes. And this obligates the archaeological team to optimize geometry, textures, and lighting for different hardware targets, which is expensive in terms of time and expertise. Meanwhile, on the Mac side, the challenge of accessibility for a standalone build has become nearly insurmountable if that archaeological team is not a trusted Apple developer. As archaeological data crosses over toward cultural heritage and public engagement, the 3D web becomes a promising alternative with solutions that include Sketchfab, Lifelike, P3D.in, and WebGL, as well as the standby of a YouTube or Venmo video. Most of the 3D web options are object viewers. As you can see playing on your screen here, this is a recording of a 3D model of the villa hosted on Sketchfab. And it allows the user to rotate, pan, and zoom the object, but the object is presented in isolation from any spatial or historical context, and it does not offer the user free movement or any interactivity. For this reason, the VILLAE project, Virtual Interaction and Live Learning Augmented Experience, uses WebGL as its platform for bringing the Villa Romana del Casale to a broad public audience through the 3D web. Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1997, the Villa Romana del Casale, located just outside Piazza Armerina in Sicily, contains the largest and best preserved collection of mosaics in the Roman world. However, due to its remote location in the province of Enna, in the mountainous interior of Sicily, the site is relatively unknown in comparison to other major sites from Roman antiquity, such as Pompeii. So this massive villa complex, which stretches across 8.92 hectares, and you can see a full plan of the villa pictured on this slide, was constructed in the early 4th century CE and is a premier example of the elite villas that organized agricultural production and social life in the late Roman Empire. This was a critical period of economic and cultural transformation from pagan antiquity to the early Christian Middle Ages. This includes a fundamental shift in visual culture and representation that are reflected in the villa's mosaics. It's not simply that the villa contains an impressive number of mosaics, although they are impressive, and all total, we have 3,500 meters square of mosaic flooring. But these mosaics attest a significantly changed visual world to that of Imperial Rome. Moreover, the mosaics are in situ, which allows us to encounter and interpret their performance, their narrative and thematic flow, the way they shape movement and attention in their original setting. In a collaboration between the Tesseract Center for Game Design at the University of Arkansas and the Institute for Digital Exploration, or IDEX, at the University of South Florida, one main goal of the VILLAE project is to engage our target audience with the villa and its mosaics within its 4th century spatial and cultural context. Now, we categorize this audience into 3 principal groups. First, professional architectural historians, and archaeologists. Then secondary and university level educators, and third, the general public. And the general public includes the increasingly expanding global audience for video games. Our platform for this engagement is a serious game, more on that in a moment, constructed in Unity 3D and published through WebGL. Performant across the major web browsers, WebGL allows 3D environments, not just single or individual objects, to be played on web pages with no plugins. This addresses the major barrier between the 3D humanities content and our academic, educational, and global public audiences, namely gated access in the form of game consoles, high-performance gaming laptops or towers, and downloadable games behind paywalls. Our target audience dictate that we have a platform and a performance target that maximizes access without friction, smooth gameplay through browser-based WebGL on a modestly priced Chromebook or better. This drives our project's second main goal, an application that engages our audience through well-constructed interactive gameplay rather than an emphasis on hyper-realistic graphics. Visual fidelity to the villa's architecture and mosaics is an essential consideration for the project, but it's not our overriding means for holding the attention of its players. Instead of that emphasis on hyperrealism, this project aims to design an application that contextualizes the player's exploration and interactions within a game narrative that explores the historiography of Roman archaeology in Italy. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, a serious game, also referred to as an applied game, is a game that provides education as its primary purpose over purely entertainment. And it's within the context of VILLAE's 2 main goals and a desire to immerse individuals in the story of Roman archaeology and villas that serious gaming becomes an important avenue for audience interaction with cultural heritage. Now, it is rare to encounter a serious game that specifically aims to engage the public with assets that were generated by an unrelated digitization project in the process of their archaeological research. Most serious games in Roman archaeology have consisted of modeling Roman cities using procedurally generated materials as the game in and of itself. Or we see examples of games engaging younger students with the process of archaeological excavation while educating them about ancient Rome, such as Dig It. These examples generally have much more intensive hardware requirements than the VILLAE project's WebGL format. Moreover, digital assets or games envisioned for digital embodiment require high-end machines with AR and VR capabilities, as is the case for a game project focused on the Emperor Augustus, currently under development in Palermo, Sicily. And as you can see in the bottom image of this slide, a screenshot from this Augustus game, the Villa Romana del Casale is featured but ripped from its 4th century context. Another example of a 3D reconstruction of Roman architecture turned into a serious game is that of the Forum of Augustus, where two separate virtual reality games were created, A Night in the Forum and Forum of Augustus VR. And you can see a shot from that game at the top of the slide. Most titles to date are unlike the VILLAE project in that the user experience is either not designed to incorporate digital embodiment, or they run on technologies such as VR that still have a considerable barrier to entry and generally focus on aspects of Roman history that are far removed from Piazza Armerina's Sicilian and late antique Roman context. As a serious game situated in 4th century CE Roman culture and Italian archaeology, the VILLAE project then is unique in its platform, its site, and its goals. In creating a serious game that teaches archaeological methods, the VILLAE project provides the public with an engaging narrative in an accessible form of virtual reality. These elements build together to provide an effective experience for users that helps to generate an understanding of archaeology, as well as the history and importance of the site overall. Now, I want to dwell for a moment on that concept of digital embodiment, because this project addresses a fundamental issue for the 3D web and cultural heritage, the misplaced emphasis on the literal accuracy of 3D models as the key attribute for constructing presence or that sense of being there for the public audience. This emphasis on accuracy has come with ethical overtones. If the model or environment is not accurate within X number of centimeters or even millimeters, it runs the risk of failing to be scientific and thus deceives its audience. The fetishism for accuracy and the distrust for seductive video game effects seems to replay that tension between scientific methodology and phenomenology in archaeology. And it has come, unfortunately, at the expense of real-time playability. For most cultural heritage 3D models, the attribute that was supposed to create presence for the user, scientific accuracy, has in fact typically frustrated it, making a real-time embodied experience of the reconstructed space impossible. The increasing reliance, however, on game engines in the archaeological visualization process has led to the recognition that interpretive progress often depends on decimating and simplifying 3D models, trading the premium placed on accuracy in favor of the insights that can flow from real-time exploration. The VILLAE project takes this a step further, recognizing that the player's sense of absorption in the experience is fundamentally rooted to the narrative of who they are in that space and the mechanics of what they are asked to do. To design such an embodied application, VILLAE had to first come to terms with the impressive and heavy collection of digital data documenting the villa. In the summer of 2017, a team from IDEX conducted for the first time the overall virtualization of the villa complex, employing an ensemble of 3D digital imaging techniques, which included terrestrial LiDAR, structured light 3D scanning, and terrestrial and drone digital photogrammetry. This fieldwork produced 727 laser scans and over 11,000 pictures for a total of 3.35 terabytes of data. One aim of this fieldwork was to establish a monitoring system to track the conditions of the mosaic floors. This is considered to be successful and produced an important academic publication. Another aim was to use the data to make this remote and undervisited site more accessible to a public audience, and this goal proved to be more challenging, hence the birth of VILLAE and the collaboration between IDEX and Tesseract. To meet the data challenge, VILLAE limited the scope of the initial prototype to the octagonal frigidarium and flanking niches of the bath complex located on the western side of the villa plan, as you can see indicated here on this slide. The frigidarium is roughly 8.5 meters across, with 6 flanking niches on the east and west sides, and 2 bathing pools located on the north and south sides. The standing remains of the architecture are preserved up to roughly 6 meters, where the original roof has been replaced by an octagonal structure made of glass and steel. The floors of the frigidarium itself and the flanking niches are covered with rich mosaics, and the basins of the pools are sheathed in white Luna marble. Even more than the geometry, the 8.5 by 8.5 meter mosaic of the frigidarium floor posed a significant challenge in terms of achieving a high enough resolution to make the mosaic legible to a player walking through the space without using a texture so large that it could not be rendered smoothly in WebGL by our target machines. In developing the prototype application for VILLAE, Tesseract was fortunate to have a photogrammatic model up to roughly 1.5 meters in height that had already been developed by IDEX. While this model was far too heavy for use in WebGL, it provided an excellent starting point for our prototype. Using a set of procedural methods developed in Houdini, Tesseract was able to decimate the model's geometry and reduce the texture size while retaining an adequate level of resolution. The texture for the actual mosaic remains at 4096 by 4096 resolution. The remaining textures for the reconstructed architecture were limited to 512 by 512 resolution. Crunch compression was used on these textures to keep their size under a few megabytes for the former, the mosaic, and 1 megabyte for the latter, the reconstructed architecture. Lighting for the model was baked into the textures. The next step was to add the architecture above this 1.5 meter height and a plausible roof. Assessing the complexity of the photogrammetry data for the upper walls and columns, the team determined that it would be quicker in terms of labor and more efficient for playability to model the walls and columns procedurally using Houdini rather than trying to decimate and fill holes in the scanning data. Known academic, archaeological, and historical sources were consulted to ensure the faithful reconstruction of aspects of the environment for which the archaeological materials are not preserved or where they are not still standing, such as the roof. Game elements and the 3D models were integrated into Unity 3D for publishing on WebGL. As indicated by the instructions to the player, the prototype includes a journal and a way to interact with items both within it and in the virtual world. The player's character is a descendant of the Countess Ersilia Caetani-Lovatelli, the famous 19th century archaeologist, epigraphist, and travel guide writer, and she's pictured in the top left of the slide. The player has journeyed to Piazza Armerina at the invitation of Professore Gino Vinicio Gentili, who directed large-scale excavations and restoration efforts at the villa in the 1950s. And you can see below an image of Gentili overseeing excavations on the site. Gentili has heard a rumor that Caetani-Lovatelli may have recorded her visit to the site when it was first subjected to scientific investigation in the 1880s. Unfortunately, the player learns in the game that Caetani-Lovatelli purposely destroyed parts of her journal after that visit to keep the mosaic discoveries safe from tombaroli or looters. The player must retrace her steps to fill in the damaged and missing pieces of the journal. And in the bath prototype, the fundamental game mechanic requires the player to match scraps discovered in the baths with their correct location in the mosaics to complete the sketch that Ersilia left behind. And in doing so, it encourages the player to do a careful study of the mosaic floor. By exploring the villa, or the bath in the prototype, and completing the journal, the player unlocks the mysteries surrounding the site's identification and the interpretation of its spaces and mosaics. The player learns then about the villa through the lens of a trailblazing female archaeologist whose scholarship promoted cultural heritage tourism in Italy. And the gameplay also introduces players to the excavation history of this important site. By using the journal as a primary mechanic for interaction and tracking player progress, this project traces the thread from the skills of a 19th century archaeologist, especially careful visual observation and sketching, to the digital toolbox of the 21st century archaeologist. Essential to VILLAE's approach is the recognition that engaging a large public audience with a cultural heritage site requires more than creating a hyper-realistic model of a real-world target. The project instead is developing an immersive experience for the audience in the site by giving them a digital body, something that's not possible through SketchUp and other 3D object viewers. Once the player has that digital body, it needs a story and a purpose in the 3D world. This forces us to confront the long history of exclusive and privileged viewpoints reflecting class, gender, and race in the development of archaeology. These culturally constructed and specific ways of viewing the past are often cloaked in the guise of universal scientific objectivity. By connecting the player's digital body and identity to Ersilia Caetani-Lovatelli, whose important role in the development of Italian archaeology is central to the game's story and gameplay, the project aims to raise questions of diversity and gendered viewpoints that are involved in every archaeological interpretation. In developing a serious game designed around the narrative elements of archaeological methods and survey, the project also seeks to engage players in the history and archaeological materials of the villa, as well as teach them about the methods used by historic and modern archaeologists when interpreting and analyzing a site. These narrative elements and design choices are all situated in a 3D model that has been optimized for real-time performance, but nonetheless generated through highly accurate 3D laser scans and photogrammetric documentation, producing a unique experience for users. While this project is still very much ongoing, and we do intend to develop additional chapters of gameplay for the villa in the future, this prototype serves as a promising initial step in the generation of this serious game. As the VILLAE project moves forward, we look forward to connecting these questions with the late antique visual language and choreography of embodied movement shaped by the incredibly rich architecture and mosaics of this 4th century Villa Romana del Casale. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion and to hearing the other papers in our panel. Thank you.